Welcome everyone to our first session of our second Career Edge webinar series. We've put this together through the Business School Alumni Network. And really the purpose of this four-part series is to help with professional development, not only to current students, but to alumni as well. And today we've got a special guest, Lauren Harris here today, and we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. But before we get started, there are a few things that I wanted to chat with you all about. First off, before we start the introductions, I wanted to let you know that there is a Q&A section. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. And so please write as many questions, and then we'll try to get to as many as best as possible. And then also on another note is that we will be sending out a recorded link to all of you attending after today's session. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll start off. I'll be moderating this session. My name is Jonathan Bach, and I am a CU Denver Business School alumni as part of the Global Energy Management Program in 2012. And currently, I work as a senior consultant for Xcel Energy. And today, we have a very special guest, Lauren Harris, who actually is also a CU alumni. And she currently works up at the CU Boulder campus in their training and development department. And so she's going to talk to us today about emotional intelligence. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm really excited to be here and really excited to have you all with us. And we're going to jump right in so we can maximize our time. I'd love to get a quick just sense of what you are interested in learning about today. So if you could answer this question in your chat, what are you hoping to learn today in this webinar? That can just give me an idea of what you're interested in, and I can let you know if we're going to be touching those topics or not. So please take a few moments and answer that question. What are you hoping to learn today in this webinar about emotional intelligence? Awesome. Where do I start with EI? We are going to talk about that. Great. Understanding awareness during passionate conversations. That is essentially where we're heading. Takes time to develop that, but we're going to get there. You will leave with strategies for how to develop your emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about leading with it. It's great. Lots of answers coming in. This is fantastic. Best practices we're going to talk about. Navigating the uncomfortable situations. You're going to get strategies for how to do that. Obviously, in a webinar format, for the time we have, we won't get an opportunity to really unpack that or role play that. So it's going to be you having the motivation and the courage to implement these in the moment. And we will talk about how important it is and how to improve. Okay, wonderful. So thank you so much. I think we are going to touch on quite a few of the items. And then my goal with you is that we can encourage you to start implementing these back into your real lives. So with that, I'd also like to get a sense as to what is the current level of knowledge with our fantastic participants we have joining us. We are going to launch our first poll. We're going to do a few polls today. And I'd just like you to answer one of these four. What is your current level of knowledge with emotional intelligence? You've never heard of it, you've heard of it, but you haven't learned much about it. You have some working knowledge, or you know a lot about this topic. So great, we have some responses coming in. I'm just going to give you 3 more seconds to answer. All right, so we'll go ahead and close that poll and we will show you the results here. So this is great. I love to see that we have the gamut, and that's essentially what I was expecting. And it's great to see that the majority, over half of you, have some working knowledge. So hopefully that means that you are here of your own interest and you know that this is an important topic, and that's why you're here. For those of you that know a lot about this topic, please chime in and add your expertise. I'd love to capitalize on the great knowledge that we have. I want to say in the room, but it's not quite in the room, across the nation maybe. So thank you so much with that. All right, we're going to jump right in, and I'd like to set a paradigm shift for you, if you will. This is a great quote that when I first learned about it, about emotional intelligence, really helped me understand it a little bit differently. And this comes from an organizational psychologist. And what he wrote was that emotions can be a disturbance or a source of intelligence. And I really want to give you an opportunity to think about how your emotions can be a source of intelligence for you. Our emotions are not going away. Our emotions are there for a reason, and they're trying to tell us something. Now, our emotions can sometimes drive our behavior, or we can be very cognizant about how those emotions are showing up in our bodies and our brains and how we're responding to stimuli out in the world. So my goal is that you can maybe shift your paradigm of not thinking of the scary E word of emotions, but that this is really a fantastic source of intelligence to help you just understand yourself and others better. So I like to start with that paradigm shift. And then with that, some of you may not quite know what we're really even talking about with EI, although I get a sense that a lot of you do based off of the first poll answer. But I wanted to provide you with this pretty comprehensive definition. This definition of emotional intelligence comes from the Center for Leadership Studies. Those of you out there that are interested in a leadership track for your career, that is a fantastic global organization that I'd encourage you to look into for further development for your own needs. Now, how they define EI is they say it is a set of emotional and social skills that influence the way we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain social relationships, cope with challenges, and use emotional information in an effective and meaningful way. That is a lot of information there. And I provide this definition for you because it really unpacks it in the complexity of what EI is. And at this moment, I'd like to just take a quick pause and remind you of that handout. So if you were able to download that handout, and we've just posted it in the chat for you again, you will see this definition with a few fill in the blank spots. So I'm going to just take a couple moment pause to let you fill in the blanks. And Jonathan, if you have any reactions to that definition, feel free to share them while we're letting them download that. If not, that's totally okay too. All right, I'm going to hope that everyone got an opportunity to fill those in. Essentially, I want you to be aware of the power that emotional intelligence really has for you. And taking an intentional approach to developing it can really positively impact all of these areas of your life, from you, from others, your relationships, challenges, conflict, communication. All of those aspects will be drastically impacted by taking an intentional development to your EI. All right, so we're going to dive in. I want to get your buy-in for why you should really care about this. And I want to give you some statistics that came out of a fairly large research study that was conducted. Talent Smart is one of the leading organizations currently out there doing research on emotional intelligence. And they did a research study of 500,000 individuals in the workplace, ranging from all levels of the organization and ranging from a variety of different areas. And what they were trying to assess was what really allows somebody to be successful in the organization. And they were assessing emotional intelligence against 33 other workplace indicators, such as conflict resolution, communication, IQ, things like that. And what they found through this one research study was that emotional intelligence, having a high level of emotional intelligence, was the single biggest predictor of success in the organization. There's a lot of data that came out of that research study, and I'd like to share just a few of the highlights that I think you will particularly find interesting. So this is my first question, and Jonathan, I'm going to ask this to you. So based off this research study, they found that EI accounted for what percent of job performance for leaders? If you were going to guess a percentage, what would you say?
Maybe 30%?
Maybe 30%? Good. And I usually hear a range from anywhere from 20% to 90%, depending on where you sit with it. And from this research study, they found that it was about 60% of job performance for leaders on the workplace made them successful. So what does this mean for you? What this means is your IQ is really important. I'm not trying to downplay your IQ by any means. Emotional intelligence is really understanding the difference between your IQ and your EQ and how they interact and support each other. What we are finding in the workplace is that you need your IQ to even enter the game, right? You need the equipment. It's like, your sports equipment to be able to go out and play on the field. Once, though, you have that threshold met of that cognitive intelligence to be able to show up and perform in that space, there is something else that starts to separate apart really effective leaders from mediocre ones. And one of the indicators that they found that was one of the best predictors of it was this intentional development and having a high emotional intelligence. So my next...
So EI is really the key differentiator.
At least based off this one research study, that's what they're saying. From my own personal perspective, I can say that is too. And I bet a lot of us would be able to identify that as well. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had the opportunity to work for a really great leader, somebody that supports you, that mentors you, asks you great questions, challenges you, supports you when you fail? There's a lot of safety there. Have you ever had an opportunity to work with a manager like that before?
Yes.
And generally then we would say they probably have a higher level of EI. Would you say that they were more in tune to how they interacted with others and how they perceived themselves?
Definitely say it'd probably be a core competency of their leadership style.
That's fantastic. And then unfortunately, and many of you out there that are listening, and I'm sure both of us have also had the opportunity to work for a manager that was the opposite of that, right? So really difficult to interact with them, really hard to have challenging conversations with them. They tend to blow up pretty easily, right? You can see their emotions flying. They have no idea how they're impacting others. And so that's where we say we would see the lower end of the EI competency coming out.
Unfortunately, I can see that manager in my head right now.
Yeah, I can as well. And I bet all of you can as well. Let me ask you a couple more questions that came out of this research study. So one is, what percent of top performers were high in emotional intelligence based off this 500,000 person research study? What do you think? Take a guess of a percentage.
55%?
55, nice, awesome. So what they actually found was 90% of their top performers. So again, right, you can have an average performer, you maybe have some low performers, but there's this differentiation between people who excel in the workplace, who are really effective, can meet their goals, can accomplish their challenging strategies, and emotional intelligence is one of the things that points to that. Now, I want to point out this. Organizations that hire managers with high emotional intelligence reported lower blank and higher blank than those with lower EI. And I'm not going to have you guess on this one because it gets a little hard here. But what they reported was the managers reported lower turnover and higher customer satisfaction. So what does this mean for you? Well, as a leader, it's really important for you to have engaged employees in the workplace. Also, it's important for you to be able to meet the needs of your customers, whether that's for me, working in higher ed, my customers are students, right? For many of you, your customers are just people out in your network that you're trying to sell a product to or provide a service to. So we see great workplace indicators go up when you develop your EI, such as return on investment, your salary, which you're going to get to in just a minute, customer satisfaction, repeat business. And we see those workplace indicators that we don't like go down when we develop our emotional intelligence, such as turnover, theft, absenteeism, disengagement, things like that. Now, if you don't care about any of that, though, I'm going to ask you this. You couldn't care less. We are finding, based off this research study and what I've seen in my experience as well, that people with higher emotional intelligence are making more money per year, period. Now, from this research study, they were able to identify a dollar amount. So what do you think? Out of A, B, C, or D, which dollar amount do you think are making more per year?
Probably somewhere in the middle, maybe 13 to 22,000.
13 to 22, great. So the answer here is actually $29,000 more per year. So if you're driven by money, this is a great reason then to intentionally develop your EI. So there's a lot of reasons for this. One of them is you can rally a team, right? People come, they work for you when they know that they have your back. They're going to work harder for you. They're going to get those aggressive sales goals, right? They're going to meet those aggressive strategies with you. Additionally, those that have higher EI can negotiate their salaries better. So just from the onset, they know what they bring, they know the value they can provide the organization, and they don't settle for less. So those are just a couple of reasons as to why people are making more money, but there's a lot of other reasons. So I hope if nothing else that inspires you. So that's a business case for why you should develop your EI. I also want to provide you with a neuroscience case for why you should develop your EI. So your emotional intelligence is really the way your body is designed to respond and engage in our world. So I'm going to provide you with the fastest neuroscience lesson you've ever had. So bear with me as we work through this. So first off, you have three main components in your brain that contribute to emotional intelligence. You have your spinal cord, which is down here, which is the least developed part of your brain. It's the oldest part of your brain. You have the limbic system, which is located kind of in the center of your brain. It's your emotional powerhouse. It's where all your emotions are stored. And then you have your frontal lobe, which is really your excellent thinking brain. It's the most developed part of your brain. It's the newest part of your brain. And it's where you can do all of your critical analysis, your problem solving, those types of things. Now, what's interesting is when we interact with the world, everything that we hear, see, smell, taste, touch, all of those senses comes up into our bodies and they enter our spinal cord. Now, our spinal cord is responsible for our fight or flight mechanism. So your spinal cord is your first reaction to the world. Now, in an emergency situation, your spinal cord is absolutely critical, right? I like to use the example, if you're a parent and your child runs out and is about to get hit by a car and you have superhuman power to go save them before they get hit, that's your spinal cord telling you to react. You do it without thinking, you're not even sure what happened, and then all of a sudden you're done and you have this flood of emotions, right? The interesting thing, though, is when that same type of trigger happens to you in the workplace, your spinal cord is going to tell you to respond the same way. So if Jonathan and I are colleagues and Jonathan says something to me that really frustrates me and I'm about to respond negatively because my brain is telling me that I need to protect myself, either fight him or flight him, right? Then that part of my brain is going to overcome my ability to react unless I'm aware that that is happening. And so my brain doesn't differentiate between those two situations. So I have to have something else that helps me differentiate between them. So then what happens is after your spinal cord has gone through it, then you enter into what's called your limbic system. The most important part of your limbic system is what's called, I'm going to give you a funky little word here, it's called your amygdala. So Dr. Daniel Goleman, one of the primary researchers behind emotional intelligence, coined the term getting amygdala hijacked. So you probably have heard of that, where people flip their lid, right? Their emotions are driving their response, their emotions are driving their behavior. So what we have recently learned in about the past decade or so from neuroscience is that our brains cannot be emotionally hijacked in our limbic system and accessing the cognitive thinking skills of our frontal lobe at the exact same time. We don't have the ability to do that. So we have to recognize that when our emotions are kicking in strong and give ourselves some time to let those emotions start to calm down so that we can start accessing our frontal lobe, so that when Jonathan is saying something to me that really frustrates me, instead of me responding with a pounding of a fist and getting in his face, I can say, okay, that's interesting. Let me ask him some questions or something like that as a strategy. So really our goal between developing our emotional intelligence and neuroscience is we're just trying to get our limbic system and our frontal lobe to talk to each other really, really well. And we can do that because we have the ability to build that pathway in our brain. So that's the fastest neuroscience lesson you're ever going to get. I'm going to take just a quick pause there. Can I answer any questions before we move on to our model? Let's see. Oh, how did they measure EI? So that's a great question. If you're talking about the research study, how did they measure the emotional intelligence? I will actually encourage you to go to talentsmart.com, and they have a full technical report of everything they did for that study. So it's pretty comprehensive and complex. So I'm not going to be able to take the time to dive into all the strategies, but they were doing things such as both qualitative and quantitative analysis through the organization, both what a direct report says about their supervisor, again, what their marketplace is, what type of ROI they have for companies, things like that. But there's a full technical report, so please go to talentsmart.com for that. Let's see. Yes, thank you. I'm glad this is great info. You will get a recording of this. I know I'm talking a little fast, but I have a lot to get through, so I've tried to give you as much as possible. Yes, you will have access to a recording. And why am I talking about the spinal cord, not the amygdala? So I really was just trying to give you an overview of both, but both are really important. And the website, our moderator just, or I'm sorry, our technical guru over here just put that up. It's talentsmart.com. All right, so we're going to move on so we can get to the bulk of the information. If you have more questions, please save them till the end. So I'm going to introduce you to the emotional intelligence model. This is going to be the most important information for you today. Now, this model is contrived between both Dr. Daniel Goleman, who I referenced earlier, who's one of the main theorists, and Dr. Travis Bradberry, who owns Talent Smart. So it's kind of a combination of those two models. So it starts by working on yourself. You have to start there. So your self-awareness is your first competency for developing your emotional intelligence. Then we move into self-management. Then we move into social awareness. Then we move into relationship management. So this is our model. It builds upon itself, and we do want to start with self-awareness. Also, this model breaks down a few ways. Your top row are your personal competencies. Your bottom row are your social competencies. So that's what's happening with other people. The left-hand side of the model are your internal competencies. So those are things like, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? Whereas the right-hand side of the model are your external competencies. So those are things, what action do I take? What words do I say? So those are a couple ways it breaks down. So due to our time today, we are going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into self-awareness and self-management, because you have to start with yourself before you begin to analyze what's happening with others. And then I'm just going to briefly give you an introduction to social awareness and relationship management, and hope that that will spark you to do your own research or attend more emotional intelligence trainings to take a deeper information there. So let's start with self-awareness. So what is self-awareness? So again, from Travis Bradberry in his book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, your self-awareness is your ability to accurately perceive your own emotions in the moment and understand your tendencies across situations. So what does that mean? What that means is I'm going to ask you a couple rhetorical questions for you to think about. Do you know yourself? Do you know what makes you tick? Do you know what frustrates you? Do you know what your triggers are? Do you know what excites you? Do you know what you care passionately about? I loved the question we had at the beginning is, do you know how you respond in situations when I care so deeply about something that Jonathan cares the opposite about? How can we engage in a conversation? So those are some of the things you want to start asking yourself. If you never really sat down and just written out, right? What are my triggers? What are my passions? What really frustrates me? That is your first step with developing your emotional intelligence. Additionally, with self-awareness, we want to understand how our body physiologically responds to stress and triggers. Because we have an emotional response before we have a cognitive one, if we can pick up on those emotions in our body first, that's going to be our first indicator or clue that we're starting to get triggered. So most people's heart will race. Sometimes your cheeks might flush. Maybe you bite your nails. Maybe you stutter a little if you had to give a presentation like this. It's going to be a little different for folks, so you need to find out what works for you. So I'd like to give you 10 seconds to think about and reflect. What is maybe one trigger you have that you know gets your blood going, that you know maybe it's hard for you to respond effectively and in a healthy way when that trigger is happening? And Jonathan, if you want to think about one, I'll maybe ask you to share.
Sure. As we're taking questions,
yes.
And I think one of the triggers that my wife recognizes when it comes to emotional intelligence is when she's hungry.
Yes.
And her blood sugar tends to get low. And we've got this like common language of code red. And I know immediately when she says code red that it's like, better get to some food quickly, fast, and really don't belabor where you're going or with long, strenuous, stressful conversations. I just know that that's not my time to bring up those sort of situations. So recognizing key triggers within yourself and others, I think, is critical.
That's amazing. That's such a good example. And also what, Jonathan, you're sharing, which I encourage all of you to think about, is the deeper you can develop relationships with people, the easier it's going to be to understand your own and other people's triggers. So that's great. My word for that is hangry. So that's what happens to me when I have my hunger going. So I want to give you some specific strategies as well. So this is what you could do. Again, identify and list out your triggers. I'd like you to reflect on the past week. Which moments in your life really excited you? Which frustrated you? And are there any themes that you're identifying in those areas? You likely don't have 100 triggers. You likely have 3 or 4, and they usually will fall in some sort of theme. I'd like you to tune into your body. What are your physiological responses to your challenges and stress? And then I want you to be aware of how your brain operates. Remember, your spinal cord, that fight or flight, is going to kick in whether you're in a true emergency or you're in the workplace dealing with, a challenging employee or a challenging colleague. So I'm going to move on to self-management now. our definition of self-management is your ability to use your awareness of your emotions to stay flexible and direct your behavior positively. So what does that mean? Well, that means once you now identify your trigger, then you actually think about strategies you can implement in the moment to better manage that when it's going to happen. So you brought up a great one, right? When code red happens, you know that's not the time to go to your wife and be like, let's talk about this challenging topic, right? We know that's okay. We're shutting up. We're not doing anything. We're going to go get some food. So Jonathan you already shared a really great strategy for how to manage that trigger in the moment. So I'd like you to take 10 more seconds. If you were able to identify a trigger in self-awareness, what is one strategy that you could maybe identify to help you manage that trigger in the moment to direct your behavior positively? Just give you a few moments. Yeah, so we have this, we have a great Q&A. It says it's been shown in studies that we are really bad at perceptions of ourselves. It can be, and I'd say there's a gamut of that. Some people are really good at it and some people are not, and then some people fall in the middle. Even answering the questions accurately that you posted, do you recommend asking others? And are there other websites? So I love that you said that. These are some of the strategies now that I'm going to ask you to do. So one is identify and list out possible strategies for your triggers. If we jump to number 4, that's what you were just talking about. I would encourage you, for those people that you love in your life or that you trust in the workplace, to ask for and implement feedback from those that know you well. I can share a really quick story. Me and my husband, so we'll go with another personal one. Whenever I'm getting really frustrated or we're about to have a fight, one of the things that I do is I will say, okay, you ready to go? Let's go at it. And I get a little, hurried and going. And he looks at me and he says, okay, lower your eyebrows. I was like, oh, and I don't even realize that my eyebrows are at the top of my head. And then as soon as he says that to me, all of a sudden I feel this release because I did realize my eyebrows are up there. So that's a great example, right? Where those people that know you well or that you love and trust, they can reflect that information back to you a lot better than you can perceive it yourself. But guess what? Once I've been told that once, now I have a much more awareness as to when my eyebrows go to the top of my head. So the other 2 I'm just going to point out real quick for self-management strategies are you cannot do enough to develop a consistent self-care habit. So the way that you are moving, eating, sleeping, relaxing, and connecting with others will absolutely be a baseline for how you show up in those stressful and challenging moments. If you're taking care of yourself before, you're going to be able to respond much better in the moment. And then finally, there's a lot of strategies that you can do in the moment. So deep breathing. If somebody is kind of coming at you and you're feeling a little challenging, physically taking a deep breath. Our science has showed us that allows our pulse to come down and our heart to slow and things like that. So those are a couple strategies for you to begin to try. I'm going to move us to our social competency so we can make sure to get through the information and have enough Q&A time. So for our social awareness, this definition is our ability to accurately pick up on the emotions in other people and understand what is really going on with them. So now we flip the script. Instead of holding up the mirror saying what's going on with me, I'm holding up the microscope and I'm saying what's going on with Jonathan. So there's a lot that you can do here to understand what's happening with others, and I'm just going to give you one strategy. Your number one, I apologize. I'm going to come right back to that definition. I had that going wrong. So I apologize. The one strategy for your social awareness is to develop your empathy. There is no better strategy, no better competency that you can develop than building up your empathy when it comes to understanding what's happening with others. There is a plethora of ideas and ways and websites and books and articles that you could look at to practice your empathy. And some of you, it's going to be much more difficult than others. I own it. I'm not a very empathetic person by nature. That's just not what comes to me. So I have to work really hard at putting myself through their perspective, understanding what's happening with people, and being able to look at different reasons as to why people might be responding the way that they are. So now I'd like to give you the final definition for relationship management. This is really the icing on the cake. This is where it all comes together. So your relationship management competency is your ability to use your awareness of your emotions and those around you to manage your interaction successfully. It comes down to that. This is a pretty big definition. And when I'm doing a full day training on emotional intelligence, we can spend 4 hours diving into just relationship management. But I want to give you one strategy that you can walk away with that would be really helpful for you. And that is called analyzing your emotional bank account. Your emotional bank account is similar to a financial bank account. You can do and say things to other people that can deposit into their emotional bank account, and you can do and say things to others that will withdraw from their emotional bank account. And almost everything you do and say is going to either deposit or withdraw. There's definitely a few neutral things, but not too many. Mostly you're going to deposit or you're going to withdraw. Now, if Jonathan with his wife, for example, me with my husband, right, we've built up a really big bank account because we've made a lot of deposits over our years. So when we accidentally make a withdrawal, because we don't usually intend to do it, we have a good bank there to support us. So it's easier then to build that back up. Now, if you're beginning a new relationship or you're a leader in an organization or you've just been promoted or you just have a new employee and you accidentally, again, we usually do this unintentionally, withdraw from somebody's emotional bank account without having that built up, then you've what we've called, right, you bankrupted that emotional bank account, and it's really hard to build that trust again. And you know what that's like if somebody's really let you down or somebody has destroyed their trust with you, you know how hard it is to build that back up. So I ask you just to think about it. Did I just do or say something that just deposited? Did I just do or say something that withdrew? Here's the last component of the emotional bank account that gets tricky though, is what is a deposit for Jonathan is not necessarily a deposit for me. And vice versa. What maybe withdraws from him is not a withdrawal from me. So I like to own it. I'm a loud, proud millennial. I love my phone. It does not trigger me if Jonathan were to be on his cell phone while we were having a conversation. That would not bother me in the least. It just doesn't. I believe that Jonathan can be on his phone and talking to me at the same time. But I bet if I were to have you all raise your hand of how many people that would bother, I bet 80-90% of you would raise your hand and say that frustrates you. So just be aware, what is a deposit for you is not necessarily for somebody else and vice versa. So it goes back down to an underlying competency of really building an effective relationship with somebody and knowing what that means.
So when building a new relationship, really seek out opportunities to build up your bank account and really identify what would be ideal ways to build up those deposits.
Absolutely. Yep, that's great. So that is your emotional intelligence model in a nutshell. I'd like to provide you with a few of the resources that I've developed for this training and a couple I want to point out. So the ones that are white there, for your next step, I'd encourage you to get the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0 from Dr. Travis Bradbury and his colleagues there. That's the next best place to start. It's going to break down a lot of what we talked about today. Also, the fourth one down that's highlighted in white is the Emotionally Intelligent Workplace. So this is really great for leaders in the organization to understand how they can lead from an emotional intelligence space and really hire, develop, and improve your employees from this space. These are just my other resources. I don't recommend necessarily starting there, but you could. I just wanted to provide you with all the resources that went into this training. And then finally, I would like to ask you before we move into our Q&A, based off of what we have heard today, I want you to take an intentional development, right? I want you to hopefully leave inspired to implement this in your world. So we're going to start another poll. And of the 4 options of one action, just one, you can't do everything at once. What is one action that you would like to take to improve your emotional intelligence today? So you could sit down and make that list of triggers. You could ask somebody you know about your response tendencies. You could start thinking about that emotional bank account with your interactions, or you could go out and maybe read or find online the Emotionally Intelligent Workplace. So take a moment to complete this poll as to what's one action you would like to take. All right, I'm just going to give you about 5 more seconds to answer this poll. All right, we're going to end the poll and show the results here. So this is great. We have a split between the top one and the bottom one. So making a list of triggers and strategies, that is a fantastic spot to start. It's a great foundation. Getting some more cognitive intelligence around this with the Emotionally Intelligent Workplace by Dr. Daniel Goleman is great as well. And then I love these, asking somebody else, that's brave, right? That's vulnerable, saying, hey, share with me, how am I showing up? How does that negatively or positively impact our relationships? Where do you see me really excelling and where are there opportunities to grow? And then thinking about the emotional bank account, I know that feels a little fuzzy and some folks don't necessarily connect to that. But if you start asking yourself that, you will see how quickly it can be defined into those two categories. So thanks for answering the poll. I'm going to hand it back to Jonathan here to walk us through our Q&A.
All right. So if you'll notice, there's some Q&A here. We've got a couple questions. So EI, corrected at all. Is this for all ages or?
I would say once your brain is developed or starting to get developed, so you probably don't expect children to be able to do this well, right? Because their brains are still being developed. And even when you think about undergrads, which is interesting, right? Because their brain are still, it's about 24 is when our brains are fully developed. So even an 18 to 24-year-old may still be working with that. But pretty much, aside from once your brain is fully developed, all ages could absolutely be correlated to EI.
So how do you successfully tell someone how to develop EI, like your boss maybe?
That's a great question. I love when I do this training. It's often, well, I do this great and they are the problem. So one is, again, emotional intelligence starts with you, right? So I would make sure that you are fully aware of how you're showing up in that space, how you're being able to pick up the cues that your boss is sending you and use that information to help develop that relationship. The other great thing that I think, especially if this is your current boss, is to go back and say, hey, I attended this webinar and hopefully I thought it was great. I would love to share some of my takeaways with you if you're interested in hearing. It was really cool, this new information. And so trying to kind of plant some seeds that way. But I will tell you, you will fail miserably by going up and saying, Jonathan, your self-awareness just isn't quite there. I think you really need to start focusing on that, right? That's going to shut down the communication really fast.
And when you say finding that common ground, really the root of it is trust.
Absolutely. No, you could not have picked a better word there. Yeah. So if you have a good working relationship, they're going to be more willing to hear those more challenging feedback. But if you don't, you probably want to start working on the trust before you even get to EI. That's great.
So we have a question on building empathy, and with it being a feeling, like what sort of resources do you recommend to building up your empathy for others?
That's a great question, and empathy can be challenging depending if you naturally have an empathetic response or not. One thing is I encourage you to seek out resources, people, books, TV shows, movies that are made and for people that do not look or sound like you. So essentially developing your cultural awareness, right? So how is it that other people respond to situations that might not be good or bad? It might just be being able to understand it. So one of the best examples I can share is eye contact in the workplace. Oftentimes we say in our Western American culture, eye contact is a sign of respect, it's a sign of engagement. We expect it from others. But in other countries across the world, the exact opposite is true, especially if you are in a leadership position, whereas your direct reports, it is a sign of respect and engagement for them to look down and not look at you eye to eye. So that's what I mean by being able to even understand that. Are you placing your cultural norms onto others when that's starting to trigger you, or can you build an empathetic understanding about how other people show up in that space? The other resource I highly recommend, if you have not engaged in her work yet, she is one of my most favorite people, is Dr. Brene Brown. She is a researcher out of the University of Texas in Houston. Her entire career is built around doing research on empathy, shame, vulnerability. So she's a fantastic resource. Google, there's a great video. Google Brene Brown, empathy versus sympathy. And it's like a 3-minute video. And that will already just start to get you a better awareness about it.
So one question comes up on very difficult situations within your emotions, and particularly in a professional setting or professional conversation. When do you gauge when that happens, and how do you kind of remove yourself and be able to process that you're potentially being emotionally hijacked?
Yeah. So, and that's a great question. And it starts again with knowing you, right? So if you're not aware of even how your body is responding, or when your cheeks start to flush, that's an indicator to you that things are starting to happen. That's why we start with self-awareness. So being able to really be attuned to your body, connected in to what are those values, what are those triggers, and how does your body respond? That's going to give you a lot of that information up front. And the other strategy that I advise folks is don't be afraid to be honest about, you know what? I don't think I can productively contribute to this conversation right now. Can I take a moment to collect my thoughts? That is a really powerful, amazing thing to do, especially in the organization, so that you know you can step away before you're going to say something. So being able to just pull that out of your back pocket when you feel like those things are starting to happen. Also, just acknowledging when it has. You know what, Jonathan? I realized I just totally interrupted you. I'm talking over your words because I'm really excited about what's happening. I apologize. I don't want to do that. Can we back up?
Sure.
Those are a couple strategies.
Would you say one technique I remember early in my career working for Rubbermaid was, if you were in that situation where you got like a trigger point or difficult question, we call it the acronym of AIR, acknowledge, inquire, and respond. Would you say that would be a technique for managing?
Absolutely, yeah. And do you know where that comes from, where they could look into it more?
No, I don't.
So maybe Google that, the responsive AIR with quotes around it, because I love that. I think that's a great strategy, and you could look into that more.
But it was just training around objections.
Yeah. I'll say ultimately, this comes down to recognizing that you have the ability to respond to a stimulus. Sometimes we think that our response is immediate, but there is absolutely a window between a stimulus that's occurring to you and your response to that. And if you can widen that window a little bit so you can choose your response appropriately, that's one of the foundational components that will set you up for success as well.
So one question comes in about managing a relationship, and potentially maybe a situation where you might be buddy-buddy with somebody, but you want it to be more of a coworker type relationship and managing these different styles. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I'm going to go back to empathy, right? Empathy. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is being a really good detective and being really, really curious. So I like to put my curiosity hat on. And if there's something where I'm like, man, why would Jonathan, my supervisor, do or say those things? That's just so strange to me. I don't get it. Instead of saying like, what an idiot, right? Or I can't believe he would do that. I can say, you know what? There's a reason people do the things that they do. And so if I can get good at being curious and asking questions, help me understand why you were approaching it that way. I'd love to know what you were thinking behind that strategy or solution. Finding that common ground, like you had pointed out earlier, but being able to do that through getting really curious, asking questions, and being able to put yourself in their shoes. Those are some of the great ways to do that, build that common ground.
Is there any full day trainings through any of the departments at CU?
So this is a great question that I would need to rely on some external support for CU Denver. I can say up at CU Boulder, absolutely. We do offer crucial conversations. We offer strengths. And if you have an opportunity through your work, or if you're going to go back to school, or if you're currently in school, I know some of you are probably students and not just alum. Anytime you get an opportunity to engage in strengths or crucial or MBTI or any of those things that help you understand yourself better, take that opportunity. If you are currently a student here, I do know your career office does offer trainings around strengths. I don't know about crucial conversations, but strengths they do. And you'll have my contact if you would ever like to reach out to me further to understand where other opportunities lie. Please let me know. I'd be happy to chat with you about that too.
Well, great. I think that we're going to wrap up for our Q&A. But Lauren, you've made the business case for, the business case for emotional intelligence. You've made the neurological business case for emotional intelligence, and then you've also given us some tools for self-management and relationship management. So through the books, and then through the Talent Connect and lynda.com, leading with emotional intelligence. So I think those are some great tools. Wanted to thank you all for attending the session today. A couple administrative notes to highlight before we finish is that we will be sending out a survey at the end of this to get your feedback on this session. along with a recorded version. So if you missed some of it, you can catch up through the recorded. Also, as another reminder, if you want to register for upcoming events through the Career Edge series, you can register at bit.ly/Career Edge 2 for some of the upcoming sessions. It looks like the next one looks really interesting too, how to negotiate the best salary, probably for a new job or your current job. And then the last thing that I'll end with is that if you want to get involved with the Business School Alumni Association, you can register at business.ucdenver/alumni. So want to thank you all for attending, and that's a wrap.
Thank you all.